The Bob Murphy Show, episode 401.
There's a tidal wave coming. What you gonna do?
Get ready for another episode of The Bob Murphy Show, the podcast promoting free markets, free minds, and grateful souls. It's your source for commentary and interviews, conducted by a Christian and economist. Now here's your host, Bob Murphy.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Bob Murphy Show. Well, Adam Heyman's back, and what are we talking about? We did try to come up with some other topic, but still, everything is just all about, in the circles we travel in anyway, the fallout from the Dave Smith, Douglas Murray, Joe Rogan episode. And so, as always, we're going meta in this. If you've been following a bunch of the commentary, I promise Adam and I are going to show clips and give other analyses that you haven't heard yet, if you care about this topic. Also, let me just say, I'm a bit behind. I apologize. Normally what happens is I record with Adam, and then I sneak in another solo episode before the one with Adam drops. But because of the timeliness of this topic, I thought it made sense just to go ahead and get this one out, this crossover out as soon as possible. Because again, it could be dated if I wait too long. So having said all that, I am going to be back to a more normal Bob Murphy Show routine this week. So thanks for your patience. Without further ado, here is my discussion with Adam on further developments in the Dave Smith, Douglas Murray fallout.
Hi, Bob.
Hey, Adam.
Well, this fire seems to be going thermonuclear because it's been a couple weeks now, right? And the Dave Smith versus Douglas Murray event on Joe Rogan just seems to be getting hotter and hotter on the social media spheres.
Although I was thinking about it, you and I did our marathon episode. We only recorded exactly 1 week ago at this point, as you and I are now recording this. So there was a bit of a lag there between the thing, but it has not yet been 2 full weeks, I don't think, since the Joe Rogan
Yeah, I
episode
think that's the
originally
case. Yeah, we're recording this on April 21st, and it just keeps getting hotter and hotter with people doubling down, tripling down, making weird arguments, such that you and I are going to sort of talk about the continuing lingering glow, the afterglow, the bad kind.
Yeah. And folks, as always, we will try to hit things that we have not seen or to comment on the commenting so that, in case you've already been listening to a bunch of this, we're not just going to rehash points you've already heard. So to that end, shall we cue up that first clip? So folks, we're going to play something for you that I haven't seen other people point out. The function of this is, I don't know how else to say this, but just to show we're not dealing with an honest guy here. And also, Douglas Murray was at the Joe Rogan interview or episode, the taping of it. So he can't claim, to say, well, how could I have known what Dave's position was? He was right there and saw it come out of Dave's mouth. So everybody knows the whole, the infamous, have you even been there? Right. People have been doing that so much now. I'm sick of it. But here is an interview that happened right after this event went down, and just listen to how Murray described what Dave Smith's position in the Joe Rogan episode was. And then you just got to ask yourself, are we dealing with an honest person here?
Yeah, that's a great setup, Bob. And keep in mind, folks, that this is just one example of many. He went on many podcasts and shows doing basically what you're about to hear and or see right here.
Breaking news again, not just writing and commenting on the headlines, but in the thick of it, thanks to a rather robust discussion you had on Joe Rogan's podcast. It's been the talk of X and elsewhere for days. There was a clash between yourself and Dave Smith, and you even took on the man who has the biggest audience, the biggest podcast audience in the world, Joe Rogan, on his own show.
I just feel, we should get it out straight away, I feel you've opened the door to quite a lot of people who've now got a big platform who have been throwing out counter-historical stuff of a very dangerous kind.
Douglas, you've had plenty of people praising your performance and agreeing with you, but there has also been criticism from those who say you are trying to silence debate and appealing to authority, you're appealing to the expert class, they say, and The expert class hasn't exactly been reliable of late.
Well, I conceded all of that in the discussion on Joe's podcast. I conceded that experts have got things wrong. Look at COVID and the lab leak. And I also said, I certainly am not shutting down debate. I'm involved in debate. So why would I be shutting it down? What I do believe, and what I think many people have completely failed to absorb, is the fact that just because, the expert class has let itself down in places on occasion does not mean that lack of expertise is more desirable than expertise. And it does not mean that that we should just have other ways of knowing about things that can be known about. The counterpart who Joe Rogan brought in for that debate seemed to think that, for instance, not going to a place that you're talking about was in some way a desirable thing. Whereas I, as a journalist, you as a journalist know that if we cover a story in a country, for instance, when you were covering the American election in 2020, as I was, you were in America. Why were you in America? Because you were covering the American elections. And if you'd have been just sitting in Australia covering the American elections, that wouldn't have had the validity that it does if you are in the country you are writing about.
So, Adam, I watched the Joe Rogan episode. You watched the Joe Rogan episode. We played that relevant excerpt here on the show. Was it your recollection that Dave said, when Murray said, wait, you've never even been? And then Dave said, oh, right, because it's my view that if you don't go somewhere, you know more about it than if you do go there. Is that what Dave's position was? Did Douglas accurately paraphrase that?
Well, not exactly, Bob. I think right after the opening music died down, Dave just jumped into the conversation before it even started and said, hey, guys, just so the two of you know, I think you have a better view of a situation on a particular country or the things going on in it if you don't go. I want you guys to all know that. I think having extra data points that's just a bad thing.
And then he also said, as I recall, not having expertise is a plus when it comes to history and politics. Okay, we're being facetious, folks. We'll stop beating. But again, my point, and the thing that's here, I want to stress this. It's not just, oh yeah, you get to shave off the edges or something. He's engaging a little bit. If Murray had accurately stated what Dave's position was, he would have said, oh, and by the way, notice he couldn't say Dave's name. Right, I don't know if it was in the clip. The woman said his name, but Murray said my counterpart on Joe Rogan. Right, he can't even say Dave's name. But if he had insisted, for example, his view was if you haven't been to a place, you're allowed to talk about it. Right? If he had said what Dave's actual position was, I think the people in the crowd would have been like, yeah, okay. And then when he elaborated and said, for example, if you're covering the 2020 elections, I am quite confident that lady did cover the 2020 elections, right? If people don't know that show, that's like a very right-wing Australian, news political program. So yeah, they covered the 2020 election from Australia. And so, and again, and you say, well, how does that kind of, right? Murray's right. I think everybody would agree. Other things equal, going to the United States and covering it, being there gives you some insight or whatever. Okay. But she's still allowed to cover it from Australia, just like Dave wouldn't deny going there and seeing with his own eyes could have added some insight, but he's still allowed to talk about, and, oh, we're not saying he's not allowed. Yeah, right. That's colloquial. We mean he can have a conversation and his view not be utterly rejected at the outset simply because he hasn't been there, right? So again, the issue is Murray was trying to say, we shouldn't even listen to you if you haven't gone there, not the much more obvious point that going there is a good thing, other things equal. Of course, nobody would have disputed that.
Well, right. And specifically, it was a dodge. In the whole, whatever it was, 3 hours of that so-called debate, Douglas Murray did not engage with the arguments that Dave was making, and to the point where he'd backpedaled so much that he was resorting to, well, you're wrong because you didn't even go. That's that's an interesting rhetorical trick, and for many people it will work, but I found it very unimpressive.
Yeah. So, and we picked that one, folks, just because I think I hadn't seen others grab that, and to me that was just so cut and dry in terms of him completely reversing and misstating what Dave's position was. Whereas if he had accurately stated Dave's position, everyone would have said, Okay, yeah, I can see where he's coming from. But as Adam says, there was other things. Do you want to talk about, I mean, he did the New York Post article. Should we hit on that very briefly, perhaps?
Yeah, sure. Briefly.
Okay. So one thing is, just before I forget, it's hilarious. And so here, folks, we'll try not to hit. I had like 8 great things to say in response to Murray's New York Post article, responding to all the brouhaha. But then Dave made his own video. He was like in Chicago going to Zany's or something, and he went to the hotel room and did a fired off thing. And Dave made like 6 of my good points. So and we don't need to rehash what Dave already said. But one thing again that I just want to make sure people are grabbing is in the wake of this, the Joe Rogan episode dropping, as you can imagine, Dave is commenting on it because this is like the biggest thing in his career thus far. With Cuomo, the Cuomo debate arguably being the only thing in the same ballpark, and then Murray's fans kept going, ha, ha, ha. I guess we can see who the real, professional is here, that Dave can't stop talking about this, whereas Murray has moved on with his life, right? Murray's not talking about this, showing that he won the debate and he's a better man. And now Murray, when he's doing multiple, shows talking about it and then writing a thing, I don't see those people coming back and say, okay, yeah, we take that back. It turns out actually Murray has thin skin too, or, he thinks Dave's big. So they're not saying they're just dropping that particular argument now. So there's that element. What do you want to say about this, Adam? I'm getting worked up here.
Calm down. Yeah, for those of us those of you who are watching on the video portion, we've pulled up onto the screen Doug Murray's New York Post article. And you'd think from the video that they've got displaying under the headline that the Pope was either in favor of Douglas Murray's position or he was so upset by the controversy that it caused his death. I think that's very unfortunate. Yeah, I read this article and it was just sad. He doubled and tripled down on every. Again, he's away from the fire and fury of the in-person debate. He's sitting in front of his computer, and he still doesn't address any of the arguments that Dave made. He just doubles down on this authoritarianism.
Folks, literally, we're not exaggerating. There is literally not one single argument that Dave made that Murray in this post pushes back against. Not one. And also, Murray gets some basic facts wrong. He conflates Ian Carroll with Daryl Cooper, right? So he's referring to the people that Rogan's had on, and he says, for example, Ian Carroll says blah, 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 and it's something that Cooper said, all right? So there's that element, and then he also refers to Ian Cooper as a comedian, as which is, no, he's just not, right? So he's just making, and in the point of this article is to say these podcasters, yes, they're trying to replace the legacy journalists, and yes, there were problems with the old media, but at least they had some standards, and these guys and so he's getting basic facts wrong as he's lecturing the new media on how you need to have basic standards. I mean, it's just shocking. One quick thing, Adam, I can't even, just to show how different I am from this guy. Back in the day, I was in a feud with Jonah Goldberg. You might remember this, Adam. I don't know if this was like, if we were like in the same camp back then. And I was writing articles for LouRockwell.com. This is when I was in grad school. And in one of them, I started out and I said something, and then I said, yes, I know if William F. Buckley were here, he would have said that was, me improperly using a past participle or something like that, or I made some grammatical joke, like to show, hey, sorry, I realized Buckley's the big deal, and then I moved on. And some guy emailed me after the article ran, and he goes, Bob, I loved your article taking down Jonah Goldberg, but I just want to point out in your opening paragraph there, it wasn't, using the past parts, whatever the thing was. And I looked he was right. And I was so mad because here I thought, I was like Zorro and just, just expertly blowing up Jonah Goldberg's article and everything. And if I started out with such a basic blunder, what I did, Adam, was I walked away from the desk and I slapped myself about 5 times in the face hard. I was so mad at myself that you get what I'm saying? Like I bought. So I'm saying, I'm going to go out on a limb and say when it came to Douglas Murray's attention that he messed this stuff up here in an article, the whole function of which was to lecture them on not having standards, I bet he didn't slap himself. I'm not saying that's a good thing that I did that. Like people could say, Bob, what's going on there? And, I got some issues with my own personality, but I'm just trying to express how I can't even conceive of this, that you'd be so sloppy and not even care You mean like his fans don't care? Like nobody cares. Like, oh, what's the difference? They're all the same. These Nazi lovers, they're all the same. Who cares?
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And I'm going to circle back to it in a little bit. I don't want to stay on this article too long because Dave Smith did a great job on his show, Part of the Problem, covering most of these. But I just want to point out again, because we're going to hit on this again, that Douglas Murray says that one of Cooper's many ahistorical claims is that Winston Churchill was the chief villain of World War II. That's so wrong as basically to be a lie, in my opinion. You know, he said on Tucker's show that he sometimes jokes with his buddy Jocko, you know, and gives that line. But that's not what he means. And you listen to the rest of the interview, it's obvious that's not what he means. What he means is that Winston Churchill did some things that extended the war, and you know, and that's kind of problematic. We shouldn't just think that everything he did was sainted and heroic, like you're reading the scripture on a plinth of a statue of Winston Churchill or something. So anyway, the piece was replete with that, but I don't think we should stick with it for too long.
Okay, and even there, just to show folks that we're nuanced here on the show, and Adam and I can disagree. I'm okay with, like, I get what you're saying. You're right. If they actually wanted to have a fair, honest discussion, they would acknowledge it. And certainly that's not a fact, like to say, you know, he thought Winston Churchill was born on this date and he got the date, you know what I mean? Where it's objective, that you could argue about who the chief villain was or something like, you know what I mean? So that is something that's open to interpretation. And so to just say it's ahistorical, you know, is one thing, but at least those words did come out of his mouth, as opposed to just about every other thing in that New York Post article literally was attributing views to people that they didn't have. That's kind of what I mean. Or like when they say things like, oh, and they're minimizing the Holocaust or making excuses, or they say like Hitler, you know, what wasn't anti-Semitic in the 30s. And no, that's not what Cooper said. And the point of him saying it was not to say Adolf Hitler wasn't a bad guy. The point of him going through that like the actual statement that he did say, his point was to understand what happened in World War II and the Holocaust and so forth. It's not just that, oh, the Germans are going along and they had Kant and blah, blah, blah. And then all of a sudden they turn into bloodthirsty monsters for like a 12-year stretch. And then they're back to being civilized again and we're cool and we hang out with that. That he was saying, no, that, yeah, Hitler had his deal, but the German people were not with him. And so he kind of had to, you know, judge the crowd and whatever. And it was only in the ravages of the war, when the whole world is coming against Germany, like, oh man, are we going to go through what we just went through last time? That then, you know, the camps and everything arose, right? So the point was not to minimize, you know, Mein Kampf or something. It's just to completely misunderstanding what he's doing.
It's intentional misunderstanding. Like we used to say, I mean, I'm old enough to remember that it used to be common knowledge that the terms set in the Treaty of Versailles after World War I caused such suffering and chaos in Germany that it made the situation pretty ripe for some authoritarian lunatic to take over. But you can imagine Douglas Murray catching some guy saying on some podcast somewhere, you know, one of the chief causes of World War II was the Treaty of Versailles. And what is Douglas Murray going to do? Come back and say, I don't think so. I think one of the chief causes was Hitler invading Poland. Dumb.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, that's what's happening here. Daryl Cooper is just saying that, you know, with the benefit of hindsight and maybe even a little bit of foresight, if you understand how nation states work, there probably were better ways to handle the situation, given how horrible it turned out, than the way it actually happened. We don't need to treat Winston Churchill like a saint. And certainly acknowledging some, you know, pointing out some criticism isn't the same thing as downplaying the evil of Adolf Hitler, for crying out loud. That's just childish and unfair and insulting.
Yep. All right. What do you want to talk about now?
Do you want to move on to Constantine?
Sure. That makes sense. So Konstantin Kissin, who is a former comedian, so I'm not even sure why we're paying attention to him, but he wrote what he claimed later was the most, I don't know if downloaded is the term or read, because it was on his, is it a Substack? I don't know what this thing is.
I don't know what it is.
It's his website. And so anyway, he claimed later that this was the most reviewed article of his career. And so he, you know, was making follow-up videos and whatever. So it's Murray versus Smith, dispatches from Podcastistan. And so, yeah, I read the whole thing, And there's barely any points in here. I mean, we can struggle and say, well, what they could have said here was, that's the thing. Let me just,
I have something to say about it.
yeah, let me just real quick. I so much wanted to have this debate. And I think, Adam, you and I, if we have time, we'll get into some of this stuff like, well, what is Israel supposed to do? There are plenty of legitimate concerns and like responses to like the Dave Smith position that I could see, but not what's going on in all of this post-game analysis from all these Murray fans. It's incredible.
Yeah, I thought this argument was terrible. Zero actual arguments in addressing anything Dave Smith said, just moralizing and more weird appeals to authority. And then, if you'll permit me, Bob, I got to read these 2 paragraphs because I find them just bewildering. So, this is Kissin. Have you listened to his podcast, though? Rogan interjects. It turns out Murray hasn't, and this is later used against him after the episode airs. Unlike Murray, I have listened to Cooper's podcast, including the one about the history of Palestine that people often cite in his defense. He details the persecution of Jews preceding the events he covers, so he couldn't possibly be anti-Semitic, is their argument. From this, they conclude that he couldn't possibly be a Nazi apologist. This sentence is weird. The reason they make this logical error is that in the entertainment world, words do not have meanings, they have feelings. And thanks to the woke left's misuse of the word Nazi for the last decade, in Podcastistan, the term is not a descriptive label, but a vague, meaningless insult used to cancel people. Unlike his opponents, Murray clearly understands that the term Nazi apologist has a defined meaning, and the fact that most Nazi apologists are anti-Semitic does not mean that you have to be anti-Semitic to fit that description. The Grok definition of a Nazi apologist is, quote, someone who defends, justifies, or minimizes the actions, ideology, or atrocities committed by the Nazi regime, often by excusing Nazi policies or promoting revisionist narratives that distort historical facts, unquote. Since Cooper does precisely this in several appearances on major podcasts, how his series on Palestine would change this reality is clearly as confusing to Murray, who hasn't listened to it, as it is to me, who has. Well, this freaks me the hell out. And it certainly wasn't anything about that Douglas Murray was talking about. He just said, when Joe Rogan and Dave Smith said, have you listened to his content? He says, no, I don't need to listen to it. I know exactly what that is. Or something similar to that. So it just freaks me out. To take Konstantin Kissin at the meaning of the words in these 2 paragraphs, if you do anything that shows any nuance on World War II, that doesn't make the Nazis just a cartoon villain, that like maybe says something that the adults in the room, the French and us and the English, if anything we could have done could have made the war worse, that's being a Nazi apologist. And even though Konstantin and Grok don't think that being a Nazi apologist means you're an anti-Semite, I'm pretty sure he knows what everybody else on the planet thinks you mean when you call someone a Nazi apologist. I don't think you're being nuanced. They think you're calling him a racist. And that's just criminal.
Right. So, yeah, I agree wholeheartedly with you. Let me just make sure people aren't getting lost here. And I understand what Konstantin's saying there. Let me steel man that. But again, then I'm going to circle back and show why, even on what he's trying to do, he's just not right. So his point is, people, Murray or wherever, will say, oh, yes, and this guy out here, a Nazi apologist or, minimizing the Holocaust or whatever. And you're right, Adam. The reason for them saying that is not, to say like some, me saying, oh, and this guy, he misunderstood how comparative advantage works or something. No, if you accuse someone of minimizing the Holocaust, you're not just saying they screwed up the date of when the Declaration of Independence was signed. That means to everybody, this is a bad person. That's what, you know what I mean? If you minimize the Holocaust, it's not just, I'm surprised at your lack of historical understanding. So that's the function rhetorically of doing that. Okay. But Konstantin is saying, oh, and so then when people accuse Cooper of being a Nazi apologist or a neo-Nazi or whatever, and then his defenders will say, well, haven't you listened to, what is it, Fear and Loathing in New Jerusalem? Is that the name of it?
Yeah.
He opens up by talking about a pogrom against the Jews and explaining why they felt that they needed their own homeland and blah, blah, blah. And how can you listen to that and think that this guy's got an axe to grind and he's really just trying to... And so now Kissin is saying, it doesn't matter what his motivations are. Just objectively, he is minimizing the Holocaust. Okay, so you're right, Adam. The way Kissin's doing it, like anyone who's just truly saying, I think, there's this common understanding that this happened in blah 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 in 1943, and I'm just looking at it, and I don't think that's correct. That if it in any way reduced by 1 percentage point what you thought the Nazis did in that episode, that would mean, you're a Nazi apologist. You know what I mean? So it's kind of like whatever the current understanding is of how bad the Nazis were. If anyone tries to change our understanding of that, then you're a neo-Nazi or a Nazi apologist or something. So that's kind of loading the deck and just kind of ossifying and saying, no one can ever go back and question the narrative. And since right now we've all been taught Adolf Hitler is the worst person that's ever lived, like there's philosophy thought experiments. If you could go back in time and kill baby Hitler, would you? Like, that's where all right. So now it's like, if anybody tries to say maybe Adolf Hitler wasn't the worst person ever to live, then boom, you're a Nazi apologist right there. Just the way Kissin's doing that. But also, just real quick, we don't need to get into this. People, and you and I covered this, Adam, when it happened. People are greatly misunderstanding what Cooper was doing in that Tucker interview. And,
For sure.
and it's partly his own fault, right? That I think Cooper, like, he has the same conversational style as if he was having a beer with somebody,
Right.
and they're just shooting the breeze about stuff, not knowing that, well, no, if you got cameras rolling, it's a big podcast, Tucker Carlson, and you say some provocative stuff, people are going to look at it under a microscope. But what he was doing in the thing where people are saying is making excuses and saying, the Holocaust was just poor planning. He was blaming Hitler for all the bad stuff that happened on the Eastern Front. Right. And then to show, I don't care what excuses you want to come up with. He was saying, and you can argue that, he went and they didn't have enough, they took all these POWs and they didn't blah, blah, blah. But hey, if you launch an invasion and you don't have supplies ready for the POWs, that's on you, right? So rhetorically, he was trying to say, I'm closing off the escape hatches. I'm not letting Hitler off the hook. He's responsible for those deaths. And people have taken that to say, see, he's trying to say, really, Hitler's not a bad guy for those people. It's actually literally the opposite of what he was doing.
I see your point, and you're absolutely right. But that one I blame Cooper for, because even though it's a strong argument, it's so confusing and sort of indirect. And you've got people already with eyes open and mouth agape, back in their heels, going, "You're excusing the murder of these people."
Yeah. I mean,
people can't even listen to him.
That's. I mean, again, and that's why I was saying he has the same conversational style, like with somebody who's his buddy in a bar drinking a beer.
Yeah, exactly.
Where your buddy's not going to stop you. Hang on. Are you for genocide? Just to be clear, because I'm not sure we can hang out. You know what I mean? Like if you're talking. So that's what I'm saying, that he should not have said that, right? Just like some of his memes, like the other one, just I'll real fat. There's the famous meme, right, where he, after the whole Olympic thing went down with the Last Supper, and then he tweeted out the Hitler in front of the Eiffel Tower and saying this is objectively better than what happened over here. And was free. He should not have said that. And his point was not to make people blow up or whatever. But again, my point was, why would you say that, right? If you say to someone, hey, do you want to go to this Nickelback concert? And I say, I'd rather eat broken glass. Right. My point in saying that is not, I think eating broken glass kind of gets a bad rap. It's actually not so bad. No.
Somebody get the phone number of RFK Jr., because I think we ought to put broken glass in the food pyramid somewhere.
I thought you were going to say that's what happened to his voice, but
I could have gone there. So yeah, a lot of what's going on in these articles are just smears. And then again, I'm reading these things, and I'm reading them twice, going, surely these people are going to address some of the claims that they think Dave or Daryl, if they're want to redirect, they'd address the claims, address the arguments, but they don't. They just say these people make claims that are demonstrably false. Well, that's not good enough. You have to actually demonstrate it,
right?
And they just never do. They're just smearing.
And again, it's not that they're talking about who's a better basketball player, and then they aren't taking the time to also address. They're saying these people are not experts. They need to be fact checked. And then the Jeopardy music plays. Okay, so fact check them. Well, no, why would we do that?
Well, no, that's not the point.
Astonishing.
On that point, this is a slight diversion, but it won't take too long. I just saw a little conspiracy theory hypothesis by, I think it was Brett Weinstein. And it was that, since the early 90s, the neocons and the Pentagon have wanted to launch a war with Iran, but then they got, how did he phrase it? They got discredited by all the disastrous wars in the Middle East, so that got sidelined. And now here they are wanting to make war with Iran again. You know, everyone's talking about it. And he was suspecting that this move to discredit Joe Rogan and all the people that he has on who are anti-war, this is just a chess move to try and knock the pawns away, so to clear the path for you know, to get the public all jazzed up about war with Iran without all these annoying anti-war voices on these annoyingly popular podcast platforms.
Oh, I absolutely think I didn't see Weinstein's particular exposition. I absolutely think that's what's going on here. That people, you know, the powers that be or whatever, and they can be of all ethnicities, folks. I'm not when I say I'm talking about evil people. They're probably mostly men, if you want to generalize. That they realize what stands in our way, and they realize this. You know, these podcasters or whatever, we got to take them out. Just like I think a few years ago, it was clear they said right-wing Christians in the United States, you know, gun-owning right-wing Christians are a big thing. And they went, you know, there was a whole campaign to demonize them. You know, these things are in cycles, but there was a period several years ago where, you know, it was pretty ramped up about ginning up about how, these guys are extremists and look at their views and they want to have a civil war and blah, 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 you know, that kind of stuff. Just to, again, fan the flames of, you got to watch out for these right-wing militia nut guys, right? So, yes, I think that is entirely true. And why would they do that? Because realizing those are the guys that are going to stand in the way of just whatever you want to call it, centralization and police state.
Yeah. We had another article in a similar vein, but if you don't mind, Bob, I'd rather bypass it and get on to this video clip that you had and then move on to another interesting debate.
Oh, yeah. So on the Murray, just to motivate it, the paragraph from the Kissin article that I want to just read was this one. So, while Rogan seems to side with Smith in this exchange, it is highly unlikely he would adopt the same approach to his own areas of expertise. Right. So Kissin just spent many paragraphs explaining why experts are important. Right. Again, total straw man. Dave is not saying if you need an electrician, make sure that he thinks the election was stolen before you hire the guy or something. Like, that's not at all what Dave is saying. Or, you know, you got to get your brakes fixed in your car and you got to ask the guy, you know, did you get a vaccination or something? Like, no, nobody is denying that expertise is still relevant, right? And so complete straw man. But then this is Kissin now. While Rogan seems to side with Smith in this exchange, it's highly unlikely he would adopt the same approach to his own areas of expertise. When it comes to mixed martial arts, his interview guests are the best of the best. The dazzling array of UFC champions, top MMA coaches, respected trainers, and other experts, his italics, does not appear to include comedian Dave Smith. There is a popular clip on the Joe Rogan Experience YouTube channel in which Smith, quote, breaks down why Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine. I was unable to find one of him breaking down BJJ moves, despite Smith possessing a similar level of expertise on both subjects. Okay, so I'm setting up the clip, and then I do want to revisit just to talk about this more subtly. But Dave, in his response to Murray's New York Post thing, I think Murray in that mentioned the martial, you know, the UFC stuff or whatever. And so Dave pointed out, and he said, it's kind of funny that they use this example because I did talk with Joe about, you know, mixed martial arts.
Often.
And, you know, yes, and often. And then Dave even said, and yeah, one time I did say something and Joe kind of corrected me, like, no, like Dave said, like a guy got knocked out and then they got hit again and they woke him back up. And Joe's like, no, that's not a thing. Right. So Dave's okay. Yep. That is how it works. And then here's just, again, to play, just because the irony of this, how these guys keep talking. Can you just play this quick clip, Adam, and I'll make the obvious point, and then we can come back to this more substantive one.
Interesting, because the consequences of exchanging with Pereira are so high, but also Ankalaev. Ankalaev's knocked a lot of people out. We always look at Pereira's knockouts, but Ankalaev has knocked out some of the best guys in the division, and he only lost one time, and that was Paul Craig has the nastiest triangle. It's so sneaky and so quick, and you don't expect it. He's so high level off his back, and he caught him, I think, with like 1 second to go in the third round, a fight that he was losing.
Yeah, he broke Jamal's arm or dislocated his elbow too. He's one of those guys like that, you know, like Ryan Hall. It's like, you know, they're on the feet dancing around. It's like, you know, what are we really watching here, kind of? But man, as soon as they hit the ground,
there's a giant disparity between his stand-up, which is good. He has good stand-up, you know, and the Bo Nickel fight was entirely stand-up. It was a good fight. You know, he looked good on the feet, but you would never say you know, this is like an Israel Adesanya type character.
Yeah.
He doesn't have that level of proficiency with striking, but God, when he gets on his back, you're in such danger. Like nobody else in the division. It's weird because most guys, you're on their back, you're not really worried about it. With Paul Craig, it's like everything has to be tight.
Especially guys that size, you don't
Yeah.
really see it as often.
No, you don't.
Especially in an era when, you know, the off your back jiu-jitsu is kind of, I don't want to say like, you know, they figured out the game on that yet, but, you know, it's not quite to that level. You still have your Craigs and Oliveras, people like that who really are dangerous off their back, but it's not as common anymore, you know?
Well, it's really hard to do.
Yeah.
And also, most people don't want to be on their back, so they don't even practice off their back. And
So this is, I mean, I feel silly saying this, as people say, when Murray and then all of his sycophants try to demonstrate just how ludicrous it is that Dave is allowed to talk about these things, they always bring up, I mean, imagine if somebody went on Rogan's show and tried to talk about MMA when they weren't experts. What both Cooper and Dave literally did that. And this is the weirdest thing, Adam. So Joe's policy, it seems to me, I haven't heard him enunciate, is that if someone wants to talk about mixed martial arts, Joe is willing to talk to the guy as long as the guy's saying stuff that makes sense, right? And then, you know, if the guy said something stupid, he would interrupt, but he wouldn't say, hold up, who have you fought? Or, you know, how many years have you spent color commentating, right? So, again, now, in fairness, I get it. Their point is, well, no, we're saying Rogan's not the expert in the Middle East or something. And so when, you know, he has these guys on and they pontificate, and so, right. And so then when Rogan has, I don't know, Douglas Murray on, he can give the other side, but he chose not to. He had 3 hours. So it's just crazy. So anyway, back to the specific thing of this, and we can move on, but he says, there's a popular clip on the Joe Rogan YouTube channel in which Smith, quote, breaks down why Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine. I was unable to find one of him breaking down BJJ moves despite Smith possessing a similar expertise on both subjects. No, that's not. Dave does have a decent level of expertise. So it's this weird thing where they're saying, oh, you're saying you're an expert. And then Dave out of humor says, well, no, I wouldn't say I'm an expert. Like he would defer to Horton or other people on this stuff. But Dave does know a decent bit about what he's talking about. And that's why I've never seen anyone stand up to him in a debate, including Douglas Murray. Right? If Dave is such a pushover, you should blow him up. And so here, the analogy I'll use is I recently was on a zero hedge debate about Austrian economics versus MMT. And yeah, we were working behind the scenes and trying to get, like a Kelton or somebody, and that didn't work. I don't know, she just didn't give him the time of day or whatever. But I ended up going against Nathan Tankus, and, he's got a newsletter people subscribe to or whatever. And I talked to some other MMT people, and they put his name out when I was like saying, who can we get, whatever. So, that's where he came from. And in the comments, some people were saying, oh, come on, this really wasn't fair. You had a PhD Austrian guy versus some kid I never heard of or whatever. You guys are just trying to stay. Okay, but I'll tell you what didn't happen. I didn't spend the entire debate saying, who is this punk? What are you doing? You have no business being on the same platform. I can't believe Zero Head. Do you know he just is a crude inflationist? Do you know how discredited? I didn't do that. No,
it
I
was
said
the weirdest thing. I watched you. You just made point after point after point after point with backup and evidence for it, and it was weird.
Last thing I'll say, I know I've been ranting here, because the thing is, folks, there's 2 points. One is just to not be, to be a decent human being, and I'm going to treat someone as an equal and not just look down and be an elitist snob, but also there's a large portion of the public that is being, in my view, seduced by the MMT views. And so thank you, Zero Head. You're giving me a platform, and this kid is willing to come against. He's not a kid. I don't mean to be so patronizing. He's coming up against me. Sure. And I'm going to take him on, and he's going to give his art, and I'm going to respond, and I'm going to do my best to convince the audience that as plausible as some of the MMT views sound, I think they're wrong and dangerous because, right? Because I actually care. I'm saying I don't think Douglas Murray actually cares about anti-Semitism per se, because if he did, he wouldn't be acting like he did. And all the people doing this stupid, making fun of Dave Smith. I mean, what more could they do to convince the actual neo-Nazis that they're right? It's astonishing to me.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Did you want to talk, Adam? Go ahead.
And imagine how weird it would be if you were having this debate about modern monetary theory with this guy. And he makes his whole pitch, and you just say, look, have you even ever been to the Federal Reserve? I mean, have you ever seen the money printer go?
Except I haven't, so I couldn't.
Right,
I'd leave myself open to a.
For all we know, maybe Douglas Murray never leaves his couch. I don't know. But the point being, yeah, you would look like a guy who didn't have an argument. And then what if you started browbeating the guy for pretending he's an expert? When you've got the PhD, why are you even opening your mouth, kid? No. We defeat bad arguments or arguments are wrong by demonstrating the opposite case, not simply by saying that the case has already been proven demonstrably false. No, that's not a move. And if you try and make it a move, yeah, you're going to, everyone watching is going to think you're a liar. And who are you lying in service of? I mean, if you've got a particularly twisted sense about such things, you'll start, looking down nasty rabbit holes that shouldn't be gone down. And yeah, I think Douglas Murray is doing the Jews, in quotes, a disservice by acting this way. He looks like he's trying to cover something up. It scares me. Speaking of debates, do you want to move on to the debate referenced in Dave versus Douglas? It was the Pat Buchanan one versus what was the guy named? Andrew Roberts? Had one of those names.
Andrew Roberts, I believe.
Andrew Roberts, yeah, about whether Churchill was a positive force asset for freedom in the world or something like that. It was a pro Churchill, anti Churchill debate from was it 2009? And I forget who brought it up. Was it Douglas or was it Dave? It must have been Douglas.
I think it was Douglas, and it was, this is nothing new, and and I was there, and Douglas, since he was there, and he assured us that Buchanan got trounced. So I guess that's what must have happened.
Well, do you want to go through the numbers or shall I?
Yeah, why don't you do it? So yeah, go ahead.
All right. So
well, before you get into that though, regardless of the numbers, I took Murray to mean according to his own value system and, as a referee.
Me too.
That he wasn't just merely reporting this is how the Oxford style rules went down.
Yeah, that's a good point. And, that's sort of subjective, but it was done under Oxford style rules, which have, a winner is declared by a certain metric. And this is what the numbers were. The pre-debate poll, there were 1,707 participants, big room. On Pat Buchanan's side was only 118. Against was 1,167. So, it's certainly the case that the room was against Pat Buchanan.
And 422 didn't know.
Yeah, undecided.
People could figure that out with algebra, but I didn't want them to have to write XYZ.
And then after the debate, the poll was 184 on Pat Buchanan's side. That's an increase of 66. Against was 1,194, an increase of 27. And the uncertain had dropped to 34. But, and it turns out this is important because math, 388 people had left the room or didn't vote or whatever. And unlike our mutual friend Gene Epstein's Soho Forum, where he's smart, he doesn't. If somebody leaves and doesn't record an after vote, their pre-vote gets dropped too. So you only end up with a population.
Are you sure? I thought what he said in his email was if they don't vote either way in both times, they get booted.
Yeah, it's the same both ways. But the point is, you have to vote twice or you don't get counted. It's not. You're not going to end up with results that have the wrong denominator on either side.
I think we're saying slightly different things. But anyway, go ahead.
Because it could be that people left, and so you have a smaller vote total at the end, or it could be that it was online.
We're getting so. I'm saying I thought Gene's email was, folks. If it's not clear, we emailed Gene Epstein to ask how do you deal with this because we weren't sure. I thought what Gene was saying for sure, if somebody says I don't know both times or is missing, then we don't. But I thought if you voted in the beginning and then didn't vote in the end, I thought your vote in the beginning still contributed. But maybe
no. I got the exact opposite impression.
All right. It doesn't matter.
Anyway,
they
weren't trying to even account for that in this particular debate. So you ended up having, if you took the new denominator, you ended up, the 118 was 6.9% of the vote, Pat Buchanan's side, and against was 68.4%. And then after, the new Pat Buchanan side is 184 votes. That's 13%, which means he gained 6.1%. And the against, with the new denominator, is 84.6%, meaning he gained 16.2%, which would validate Douglas Murray's position that the pro-Churchill side definitely won that debate. But you and I were talking, Bob, and I think the denominator needs to be the original number, right? The 1707.
Yeah. So so this is our value add here, folks. So after all this stuff was blown up in certain corners of Twitter, X, some people were like, "Whoa, hang on a second here. It's funny that Douglas Murray just so casually said that Buchanan's side lost, and in fact." If you watch the C-SPAN debate, the moderator at the end will come out and say, the tally's in and the cons have it, the neocons, the opposite, the Buchanan opponents in this debate lost or won. So Buchanan lost. And so there were people going around saying, wait a minute. And they were like having screenshots of the actual totals, from the C-SPAN clip or whatever, where saying, wait a minute, Buchanan's side, they picked up more total votes. As Adam is saying, they picked up 66 votes, whereas the other side only picked up 27. And they boosted their own, percentage. Since Buchanan started with such a low amount anyway, the percentage increase of his votes was way higher than the other side, right? So no matter whether you look at absolute raw numbers or percentages, clearly Buchanan's side won. What the hell? And it turns out that no, if what you mean is the percentage of the votes cast, who moved that in percentage point terms, as Adam just said, Buchanan's side did lose. And so that's why I think the moderator, they correctly reported it. And what Adam and I are now saying is, okay, yes, according to the Oxford rules, but surely something's screwy there. So I just to show people what can be so weird here, I came up with an example to really drive home the point. So imagine, Adam, that we start out and it's you and I are debating something, and originally there's 200 people in the audience. And in the pre-poll, before we debate, they poll them. It's 20 people vote in favor of my side, 80 vote in favor of your side, and 100 people abstain, right? So clearly I have 10% of the crowd and you have 40%, right? Because it's just half, right?
Yeah.
Then suppose we debate, the people, the people, the undecideds, they're just so bored with what we're doing, kind of like this podcast, right? They just walk away. Okay, so the 100 that abstained in the beginning, assume they just left. And then of the 100 who did originally vote, suppose I win 10 of them. So 10 of them vote for me and 10 fewer vote for you. So that means originally it was 20 for me, 80 for you, and now it's 30 for me, 70 for you, right? So you didn't change anybody's mind. I changed 10 people's mind. I switched them over. The people who originally didn't vote just left. You would think surely under any metric conceivable, I won and you lost, right? Except, oh wait, no, I can think of a metric by which you won. It's the way the Oxford votes work, right? And people are like, wait, because under that new thing, I have 30% of the vote and you have 70% when the dust settles. So that means I boosted my total from 10% to 30%, so an increase of 20 points. You boosted yours from 40% to 70%, an increase of 30 points. 30 is bigger than 20. So in that example I just gave, you would have been declared the winner, even though you didn't change a single mind, and I took 10 of your people and switched them to my side.
Yeah, it's precisely right, which is why I think the results as reported on this Buchanan Roberts debate are wrong. I think they should have assumed that the people who didn't stick around to vote the second time should be counted as undecideds and kept in the denominator, the 1707. And when you do that, Pat Buchanan's side moves from 6.1% to 10.65%, so an increase of 3.8 and change. And the against side moves from 68.4% to 69.1%. So they're about 1.5% increase. And so in my opinion, if you do it right, Pat Buchanan's side definitely won. And that should suit your intuition too, because he picked up 67 actual more votes, and Roberts only picked up 27 or 66.
I had 66.
Yeah, 66. Sometimes sevens creep into my numbers. It's my sign, my birth sign.
Yeah. Okay, so big picture, folks, just in terms of the nuance there, that yes, there was a cross current, people thinking that, oh no, C-SPAN, the monitor just screwed up and looked at the totals and by Oxford stuff. And I think, again, technically, I think they did it the way it's, that I think that's done. I'm not, but as Adam's saying,
according to Grok, there's not one certain way to do it. It's a matter of dispute. So,
well, anyway, I'm saying I could see them doing it the way we hypothesized they did, as opposed to the moderator just made a mistake or, was in the bag for Churchill. This one of these, anti-Nazi moderators that just running all over the place. So beyond that though, did you actually watch? I didn't have time. I wanted to, but my joke was, folks, that if I could have cloned myself, I would have, but I didn't actually get to watch some of this. I'm assuming you don't agree with Murray that, oh yeah, Buchanan made a fool of himself and just made error after error that was pointed out.
Certainly not. I mean, it was an all British audience, as reflected in the pre-debate polling. They were all loving some Churchill, so it would have been hard to change too many minds. But I did think it was an interesting debate. I thought everybody made interesting points. One thing was kind of curious. There was Pat Buchanan arguing that Churchill did a bunch of things wrong that contributed to more suffering than if he had done things right. I mean, most people who are familiar with Pat Buchanan sort of know that argument. Dave Smith paraphrases it quite often. But it was 3-on-3, this debate. It wasn't 1-on-1. And the other two people paired with Pat Buchanan were interesting. One guy was mad at Churchill for taking England off the gold standard. He was really into that, which surprised me. And he was upset that Churchill didn't spend enough on the military in the run-up to the war, and then he took him to task for some military blunders. He was clearly a military historian. And then the other guy, he was sort of attacking Churchill from the left, mostly, and he came with an interesting quote I never heard before that I think the audience might want to hear. It's from 1931, and Churchill is defending the British Empire in India and opposing the Indian independence movement. And there's this quote, him giving a speech at some, I don't know what the event was, but something fairly inside baseball, like it wasn't in a big crowd. And the quote is, "India is a geographical term. It is no more a united nation than the equator." And you can hear that in a pompous British accent, and you can see what he means. He's a colonial man. And he thinks, these people that we're ruling over, I mean, maybe he's got some idea of the white man's burden or something. We're here to civilize these people, but he clearly doesn't think that they're a nation and we should respect their rights or anything like that. He thinks they're the proper things for England to rule over these people. And when they seek independence, well, what are you even talking about? You're not even a nation. Mm-hmm. And I only bring that up because I hear that exact argument come out of the lips of people like Douglas Murray when they're saying, what do you mean Palestinian? There's never been a country called Palestine. Why are you acting like Israel is doing something bad to some country with peoples? It's not like that. And I just thought that was interesting. It was a little historical echo. And I think it says something about the mindset of people who think that are more favorable to colonialism, or I don't know, remember it fondly, or think there's nothing that wrong with it, or I guess I don't know. I can't steel man what they're saying, but I thought it was interesting.
Okay, well, I'm glad you checked that out. Do you have more you want to say on that, or should we continue our meandering?
Let's meander.
Okay, so I don't want to forget this thing about, the JRE YouTube in which Smith breaks down Putin invading Ukraine, and this analogy I have, or not analogy, but a different example of this type of thing is recently, well, it was right after when Trump's tariffs came out. And Dave Smith did a whole podcast episode breaking down the case for free trade. And, I'm biased because he thanked me and Gene Epstein by name, about how we're the people that taught him the most, or whatever, mentors or living economy. I don't remember what he said, but he singled us out as people who have, given him stuff over the years, and he's been watching our stuff. And, I thought it was a fine demonstration, and certainly I'm glad Dave released that. He didn't say anything wrong, and I was really glad he did it. because Dave has this big audience, and I'm just, occasionally just say to myself, this is amazing. It used to be a thing like if, oh wow, Clint Eastwood is, says some libertarian things, or then shoot, who's the guy from Wedding Crashers?
Vince Vaughn.
Vince Vaughn. Like,
and,
wow, look at this. He went to
he
went to Ron Paul's birthday, but this guy's awesome. We got some. And then when Dave starts coming out and the more stuff he's reading, it's like, oh wow, he actually talks about the non-aggression principle. That's kind of neat. That some New York City based stand-up. And then the more he got into it, it's like, oh wow, this guy's really good. He understands. Wow, he's a 100% reserve banking guy. And then started absorbed all of Scott Horton stuff. And pretty soon he's like, let me go do a thing about a 90-minute discussion about the state. And here I'm going to cut it off at 1967 because we really can't go beyond it. And he's going through. And again, if it was just riddled with errors, okay, then it would be ridiculous. But as far as I can see, I would think if it were riddled with just basic errors, people would have pointed that out, and I'm still waiting. Okay, so anyway, I just this idea, and we are in a podcast age, and of course, if you think that U.S. tax dollars are being used to support the mass killing of a bunch of kids for no strategic interest, I mean, among other possible objections, you just keep your mouth shut because, among other things, because I haven't gone out there and seen it with my own eyes. What would you do? Go ask the mothers, hey, how did you feel when your kid got blown up with U.S. bombs? Okay, I'm done. I don't know what more to say on that.
I think that's all good points. As we close out here, I think I'm just going to try and make a more meta point. We're moving through a whole bunch of changes in the landscape of where people get information. And for a while, we had a huge problem where there were limited channels and a bunch of gatekeepers. And turns out that sort of a system is corruptible. And the liars take charge of it and start feeding the populace a bunch of lies. And that's bad. And then if you wanted to steel man what Douglas Murray could have said on Joe Rogan is that, there's a problem with all this decentralization too, which is that what if a wingnut gets a super large audience and then he has nothing but wingnuts on his podcast and that starts to, feed the populace a bunch of lies that are dangerous. And okay, that can be dangerous too, but I definitely prefer one system to the other, and it's the decentralized one, because then you just go out and make more arguments. That system is fixable just by using free speech in a way that the other system just didn't have a fix, that wasn't torches and pitchforks and
right,
running the people out of town on a rail. And I wish Douglas Murray had made that point, but I think you're right. I think it was more that I don't know. The impression I got that is that he wasn't there to be honest. I thought he just wanted to shut down what Rogan was doing, and I thought that was pretty crappy, especially when he accuses people like Dave Smith of being, vaguely racist or noxious smelling or serving the interests of evil people or something. And isn't that kind of weird?
What are you watering?
Yes, what are you watering? I hated that whole approach. It really pissed me off. If I had been Dave, I probably would have grabbed a coffee cup and done something Bob Murphy wouldn't have done. Chucked it at him or something.
I'm trying to think of in The Big Lebowski when the sheriff throws, he goes, "Oh man, such a reactionary." Or something. I know we're winding down here. I can just tell from your body language and the words you said, but just real quickly, and then if you want to talk about this more, feel free, Adam, of course. But I did want to just mention, as we're grabbing the meta discussion here, there was something to it, just this basic misunderstanding that the point. And Dave had done a response to this in the wake of it when he was on Piers Morgan against the guy from the War College or something. And this point about you don't understand how war works and intention. Okay, so here's the issue.
Painful. Oh, that was painful.
So here's the thing that people will say, "Oh, stop accusing Israel of deliberately killing women and children with your provocative, woke language, Dave." That there's a huge distinction between regrettable collateral damage when Israel's trying to take out Hamas, who, by the way, are using human shields. It's their own fault, versus, October 7th, they came and they deliberately targeted civilians. And so then Dave to say, no. When I say they're deliberately killing kids, with U.S. funded weaponry and such, I mean it in the same way that if I'm tweaking the example a little, but this is the spirit of what he said, some guy comes and kills my kid and I'm mad at the guy and I go and I see him go into an apartment building and I blow up the whole building. I can't say, well, that was the only way to get at that guy. Like, no, I would be charged with first-degree murder. And then he said, even the cops, because people then, this girl did an objection to, to go through and explain to him. No, it's just what Dave Smith clearly fails to understand is blah, blah. And so, and she was making it all just about authority. That, no, that's vigilante justice and trying to make it. And Dave was like, okay, I can just adjust my example if it's the police, right? If some gang kidnaps some kids and they go into an apartment complex and there's hundreds of people there, the police cannot level the building and say, well, we were trying to get those kids out. That it's not just you'd be, and the police would be charged with murder or something, right? So people are saying, oh, you're just trying to, you're using your own value judgment. We're talking about the objective. And I'm saying that's what Dave's point was. He wasn't saying what he thinks should be the case. He was saying it is a fact. The way our legal system works right now, if the cops leveled an apartment building and killed hundreds of people because some kidnappers had a few people inside, they would get in trouble. You're not allowed to do that. Now, and you can say, well, then what are we supposed to do in cases like that? So now if kidnappers just hide in an apartment complex, that means kidnapping's legal? We can have that discussion, but it's not up for debate as to how the police would be treated. That was Dave's point. And so people were trying to, and I get it. And Dave, too, at times was saying, I'm talking about basic morality. But he meant, I'm not talking about international law, right? He's saying just because you think in war you're allowed to do something, he's saying, no, even if the police do something domestically, so clearly something is screwy there, that if the police did it, we would agree that's murder. All right. So anyway, I just wanted to make that point that there's a sense in which Dave really isn't just appealing to how I feel about the situation. He was saying, no, call it what you will. You can say the cops had no choice and maybe a jury wouldn't convict them, but clearly there would be an inquiry and, they would have to determine, these cops just leveled this whole apartment building. You can't do that.
Yeah, it's tricky. All these things, these applications of morals and even legal rules have to be done to the messy world of a specific context. And that's just always going to be tricky. Like you can describe a situation where you using defensive force appropriately kills an innocent, the classic, the guy running at you with a Glock in both hands, firing at you, and he's got a baby strapped to his chest. In returning fire, you'd save your life, assuming that's the only way you could save your life, assuming you're, backed into a corner, can't evade or whatever. Yeah, you might hit that baby, and it's going to be perceived as justified by a whole lot of people, probably including me. And then on the other side, there's, the way people talk about what's happening in Gaza, where it just seems like it's so incredibly disproportionate. And I hate sticking my foot into the messy business of trying to decide whether this case is justifiable or whether it's not, but it is important that we recognize the point Dave made was great. Whether it was justifiable or not, it was certainly intentional. And It's weird that you guys don't even want to have that conversation. Like you can just click the box, okay, we're at war now, and now nothing matters. That's pretty awful, especially since we're in this sticky, awful Hatfield versus McCoy situation where everybody is sure that the other side is an unspeakably evil actor and they're not human and nothing matters. Both sides, talk this way, broadly speaking, not 100%, obviously. And it's just awful and unfortunate, and I don't see a way out.
Yeah, and that kind of back and forth is what I thought was going to happen. Yeah. On the Joe Rogan when I knew it was Murray versus Dave.
Me too.
And then it was interesting when I would ask people, on Twitter when they were talking about how Dave made a fool of himself and I would say, like, what would you say were the top three, points in the debate where Murray crushed him? And what, to the extent that they had any argument, people would say, oh, Dave said Israel had no right to defend itself and that, they just had to lay down. And I know that's not Dave's position, right? We don't need to get into it because this isn't like us defending Dave, but I've heard him many times say various types of things. Just to give you an example, like, well, for one thing, Netanyahu shouldn't have allowed the fund. You know what I mean? Like, there's demonstrated evidence that the Israeli government, at least factions of it, wanted Hamas to have a low level of influence so that they could discredit the two-state solution. And then also that the Israeli Defense Forces failed on October 7th, right? Normally that, it's kind of like a prison break and they should have repelled them. So, there's other things. It's not just that, either Israel is allowed to go in and just level the place and kill tens of thousands of people, or Israel has no right to exist. Like that's a false choice.
Yeah, instead of discussing the real issues in a substantive way that could maybe get us to something like clarity, I didn't want to put this article on the screen or talk about it too much, but you did share the Spiked article by a fellow named Brandon O'Neill.
Oh, I forgot about that one. Yeah.
Let's
When
see
you were
what-
saying, can we skip it? I didn't even remember what you were talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the one. And it's really weird.
That was so
this
5
guy's-
days ago.
Right. The guy's byline says he's the chief political writer. And this is one bizarrely written article for a guy with that title. I mean, this guy is written by some real weirdo. Just the manner of speak. I mean, it was so unprofessional and like whatever modern day hipster is. Anyway, he just does a whole bunch of appeals to authority and name calling, mostly racist. And then he says the following, disparaging Dave Smith to prove that Dave really hates Israel. That's the quote, really hates Israel. He links to Dave's most recent 3-hour-long appearance on the Lex Friedman podcast. I watched that podcast, or I listened to it, and I'm pretty sure Dave never once said, "Oh, by the way, Lex, I hate Israel. In fact, I really hate Israel." I'm pretty sure that never happened. So much like
for people who don't, Adam's not exaggerating. This guy in his casual style said that
it's weird.
Dave Smith really hates Israel, and then had a hyperlink, and you'd think it'd be to,
And I felt
don't
like
know
I was one Bob Murphy back on Contra Krugman days. I'm clicking the link to see, well, what is he talking about? Is Dave Smith really hates Israel? No, it's that his appearance on Lex Friedman. That's so dishonest.
I can't help myself, Adam. There's this lady. She had like 5,000. If she had 30,000 followers, maybe I would have like said her name or something. But she only had whatever. But she had a thing that said, "Oh, I watched Dave Smith, the Chicago thing where he did the response to Murray, to his New York Post." So she said, "I watched Dave Smith's 58-minute response to Douglas Murray's New York Post article, so you don't have to." A thread, and she goes through, and I got to the third lie, and I just stopped and I wrote and I said, "You better hope that most people don't watch it because they'll see what a liar you are." And so then she wrote back and said, I realized it. And then one time at band camp, so she wrote back and said, "Oh, Bob, we're all ears," or something like that. You know what I mean? Like, in other words, okay, bring it. And I was like, okay, fair enough. So, if I throw out a line like that, I should back it up. And I said, because I'm not going to roll like Douglas Murray, and I'll actually cite it. And so that I had to put my kids down or whatever. And I came back and I went through the first 3 things. And she was saying stuff like, Dave Smith thinks that objective truth can't be known, or at the very least, it can only be known if enunciated by people that he approves of. What? And so I wrote and I said, this is 100% absolute bull excrement. I said, I can't even imagine what he said that made you type those words. I said, what's interesting is you could be a bit hyperbolic and say that's Douglas Murray's position, that he's saying you're only allowed to disseminate. I said, that would still be a little unfair, but that's close to what Murray said, whereas Dave said nothing at all like that. You're just making that up. And she said a bunch of other stuff that I just pointed out. I said, no, just complete lie. A guy commented and said, it's weird to see Bob just calling someone a liar when I have watched, Contra Krugman and know that Bob's very like, but that's this lady. There's no other explanation. And then what's funny is I checked in, no response, right? You would think if someone published something and some guy came in and called you a liar and you said, "Oh, really? Tell us more." And then he listed 3 things. You'd think you might want to respond to that, just say, "Well, no, I'm not a liar," or "Here's where he said that." And then I thought, oh, well, maybe she just has been around. And so I checked to see, like, has she tweeted since I answered her? And yeah, she retweeted like Kissin or somebody else's thing about how there needs to be standards and objective. You know what I mean? Like, people accusing Dave Smith and his fans of not having any journalistic integrity and ignoring me pointing out that what a liar she was, and her just like, yeah, I'm not going to come back to that and address that. Anyway.
There's this massive disconnect, and it's a gulf I don't think can be bridged. I've brought it up, I think, with you, this 2 movies on one screen thing, where people will hear the exact same thing, a piece of video say, and come away thinking, with a 180-degree different opinion about what they just saw. Trump will say, we've got a big problem with Mexican immigration, and they're rapists and murderers. They're not sending their best. And a guy, a Trump supporter, will think, yeah, it is a problem. We should do something about that. And someone who hates Trump goes, well, this guy thinks that my landscaper and my friend is a rapist and a murderer. That's crazy. This guy's insane. And there's a whole bunch of that on war issues, because people just get their dander so far up with Russia, Ukraine, and even more so in America about everything Israel. And so you can imagine when somebody, I can easily imagine, I see it all the time, when people hear any criticism of what Israel is doing and they just hear, I want to hurt Jewish people, I hate Jewish people. And I don't know if there's any way to bridge that divide. People just, I think they literally hear that. Or words to that effect, an equal sign. Yeah. What his said equals, I hate Jewish people.
Yeah, I think there's two things going on, and then we can wrap. I know I pushed this further than you wanted to originally. I think there's two things. One is, in fairness, there really are people who come out and say that, you know what I mean? Like at this point, there are like the Pepe the Frog guys or whatever that will literally, okay, Jew problem. And stuff.
I know.
So there's that, so they can just see it. But then also there is the projection element. Like some of the stuff that this lady was saying, like I said, it was so clearly what she was doing or what Murray was doing that I realized, or like how careless Murray was in his New York Post about conflating Ian Carroll and Daryl Cooper, and then calling Ian Carroll an ex comedian or whatever. And it was like, because he's so sloppy with people he thinks are useless, he just assumes, oh, that's supposed to be what Dave is. And I noticed that back in the Contra Krugman days, where Krugman would like refer to how these people over here think, and it was so clearly he was describing himself. And I realized, it's probably because in Krugman said, like, he's not aware he's doing it, but just like he knows how he operates, like from the left wing side, and just assumes, anybody who disagrees with me, they must assume my mirror image. And so that's why he can so confidently say, the only reason you could possibly oppose deficit spending is that you are in the, anyway, let's stop there.
All right. Well, let's wind it down. Unless you have anything you must get off your chest.
I think I hit all the points.
All right. I thought this was great, Bob. But I swear, if we come back in a week and hit the same topic again, something has seriously gone wrong with the universe.
Well, it'd be bad because that means like we're at war with Iran or something if we do.
Something, yeah, exactly. All right. Well, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for putting up with this. I hope you got something, quote, value added out of it. Check out bobmurphyshow.com if you haven't already, and check out my YouTube channel, Heyman Nature. Please put quotes, Haman Nature, because if you don't, you get 583 instances of a very popular Michael Jackson song. And also check out my Substack, HeymanNature.substack.com, and Bob and I will catch you next time.
It's funny, in a related note, I almost named my podcast Beat It. So, anyway. Thanks, folks. See you next time.
Bye-bye.
You've just experienced another episode of The Bob Murphy Show, the podcast promoting free markets, free minds, and grateful souls. For more information and to subscribe to this podcast, visit bobmurphyshow.com.